Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting Sigvald the Magnificent. And, wow, finally to do something different on this channel. Alright, so a simple unboxing. There's only like two sprues I think. Assembly is very straightforward, it's very basic. We're just going to shave off all the excess flash and stuff with a razor knife. Now, while most of the assembly is going to be done with super glue, the sword is going to be done with modeling glue. The reason is because the sword piece is three pieces: the sword in the hand and two hilt pieces. And to make sure we don't accidentally glue it improperly, we'll be using modeling glue because it glues slowly. I had to use like a tool to help hold the pieces and then slowly nudge them together, so this was actually a very difficult part. Do not use super glue on this, you'll screw it up. I've now assembled up to the point where assembly will get in the way of painting. The body is completely assembled in itself. Each of the capes are separate. The head is assembled with the hair. The two shoulder pauldrons, are separate, as they will get in the way because they have to be on top of the cape as it is glued on, so we'll wait on that, and the shield separately. And we will now be priming this with ultra bright gray car primer. And once that is all done and everything is primed and ready, we will then move on to some Liquitex modeling putty in order to help with the base. We'll apply the Liquitex modeling putty right around the edges of the pre-made base to add some more flair to it, because otherwise it'll go from a nice looking base to just flat, well, circle base. Now with Dark Reaper and Celestial Grey and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to be painting the base. With Dark Reaper, we're going to apply it all over the stone in order to, well, as a base layer. Now these colors are mostly like a bluish tint, and I'm trying to copy the box art. And then I'm going to get some Celestial Grey, and then I'm going to dry brush it all over the stone, back and forth. So I end up doing a second layer of dry brushing on it, and I don't use the Pallid Witch Flesh. I just apply a second layer of the Celestial Grey, and it works pretty well. Now with Drakenhof Nightshade, we're going to use this and we're going to apply this onto what looks like there's pavement or paved stones on this, and we're going to apply this on there to darken it to make it look like it is colored. The ground is colored, so like little paving stones. And now with Mournfang Brown, Nuln Oil, and XV88, we're going to be painting the dirt on this. Now with Mournfang Brown, we're going to use this and apply this all over the base where it looks like there is dirt, and this is scattered all around. And once that is done, we're going to take Nuln Oil and then apply this all over the dirt itself. And when that's done, we're going to go back to Mournfang Brown and we'll carefully dry brush / overbrush all the dirt that we've painted. And once that is done, we're going to go with XV88 and do a light dry brush on the raised hills, the upper parts of the dirt. Light dry brush. And now with Xandri Dust and Skeleton Horde Contrast, we're going to paint the skulls and skeletons surrounding this base. With a base layer of Xandri Dust, we're going to apply this all over the bones. And when that's done, we will apply a simple layer of Skeleton Horde Contrast all over. Now one thing I will note is that after it dries, we will apply a second layer of Skeleton Horde Contrast directly into the eye sockets to darken them further. And when that is done, we will then use Xandri Dust and apply a light layer all over the skulls. We'll be basically painting straight lines on the highest points of each bone, as well as the skulls themselves. Alright, with Elmer's washable school glue gel version, I like gel because it is really good for holding base materials. We will then apply this in random patches throughout, mostly to cover any kind of mistakes we may have done. Maybe we dry brushed too heavily and like just splattered everywhere, or just some places to cover up some mistakes with the skeletons. We'll apply this all over, and then with this green grass hobby stuff that I bought like 10 years ago and have never used, and it's a solid brick, I'll then spread it around in patchwork. And once it dries, it'll look okay. Now with Agrak's Earthshade, spoiler, it's kind of a mistake. I should have done like Seraph Sephium, but this is too dark of a color. I would have gone with a lighter brown looking back, but basically I take this and apply this in random patches on the grass to differentiate it, to make some grass look fresh, some grass look stepped on and dead. But this is too dark brown of a color. I would recommend a lighter color unless it's a part of a scheme you're going for. Alright, now, with Genestealer Purple, Corn Red, Pallid Witch Flesh, and Carrionburg Crimson, we're going to be painting his capes. Now, we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Genestealer Purple and Corn Red, and we're going to apply this on the top parts of each of his capes. Now, let's be honest. Sigvald is wearing silk. He's not wearing cloth. So as such, I kind of want to keep a very smooth, straight-lined, painted cloak. I don't want it to be like dusty, like cloth, like Nurgle uses. I then apply Carrionburg Crimson all over the capes, and I make sure it doesn't pull too heavily. I just want the color shading darkened and the few folds to have a little extra darkness in them, but I don't want like an ocean there. I then go back and with the Genestealer Purple and Corn Red mix, and then I just draw straight lines on all the folds, raised areas, and edges, and for the main wide areas of all the larger capes. Now here are the two capes. The contrast in color is a little high, but I'm hoping that won't matter in the end. I'm gonna airbrush like a medium color in between to hopefully tie them all together. So I then take the Corn Red and Genestealer Purple and add some Pallid Witch Flesh to whiten it, and then I apply it all over. But this is a little too much, and the color is a massive contrast. So then I take my medium color I was going to airbrush on the test piece, and then I take its Carrionburg Crimson, and then I spray it over, and then it doesn't magically fix everything I thought it would. So I'm stuck. Well, this sucks. I spent like 2 hours getting it all right, painting all the lines and stuff, but it just looks bad. So, the next day, I get to it again. I go with Corn Red, covering the whole thing. I'm going to go big. I'm going to take the airbrush, and then I'm going to take Genestealer Purple, and I'm going to airbrush Genestealer Purple on the higher raised areas. I'm going to spray from the sides to try to get the folds on the sides, then I'm going to spray directly onto these giant, like, balloon part of the flaps. Yeah. I then take the pure Genestealer Purple and then I dry brush it sideways or against the folds. I don't want to go with the grain. And I do this heavily on both pieces. I then take Carrionburg Crimson and apply it all over the capes. However, I go back like right after applying it and I constantly like dip my brush in and then wipe the excess off on a paper towel rag right next to me. And I keep doing this repeatedly because I do not want it to pool heavily. I want very little in. I just want it to pool in a little bit in some places. So I spend a while just going back in and dipping in and like, I'm basically drill for oil here and I take everything out that's too much. I then go back with Genestealer Purple again, and then I dry brush against the grain again, and with the grain along these giant puffy parts of the cape. And then I take Carrionburg Crimson again and a very fine pointed brush, and I apply directly into some recesses that I want it to be dark. I then take pure Genestealer Purple with a brush, mixed 1-to-1 with Pallid Witch Flesh, by the way, and then I basically just draw some straight lines on some of the most pronounced folds or edges, just a thin line. And then finally, when all that's done, I then go back with Carrionburg Crimson and Airbrush and I apply directly into some areas to smooth things out, or basically spraying it directly into the giant recesses of the edges of the cape. And now with Pallid Witch Flesh, Carrionburg Crimson, and Lamian Medium, I didn't show it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint the undersides of all the capes. So with Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to, basically paint all the undersides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to mix the Carrionburg Crimson and Lamian Medium together. And I want it diluted heavily. So you see me diluting it here. I believe it's around 2 parts Lamian to 1 part Carrionburg Crimson and a little bit of water mixed in to make it flow better. And then we apply this to the underside. Alright, after it dries and we make sure it doesn't pool, we will heavily dry brush the entire thing across for the folds, and then once that is done, we will then apply another layer of the Carrionburg Crimson mix into it. Once it dries, we will dry brush again heavily, but on the last one, we're going to heavily dry brush the parts of the cape that are towards the end parts. We want them to be extra white. We barely want any of the Carrionburg Crimson to show up. So we're basically going to be doing downward strokes away from the part that attaches to the person. We're going to be heavily dry brushing the other side. I don't know how to describe that, but just watch. And then with Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to edge the, how do I put it, where the edges of the capes, we're going to have it Pallid Witch Flesh. And one thing also, we're going to be painting these symbols on the back of his main cape, Pallid Witch Flesh. Now, we want to make sure the paint is not too runny, and if you believe it might be too runny, since it's easy to add and not to take away, dry a little bit on the tip of a paper towel to get rid of the excess, and then paint on it to it, and you should be fine. And now with Xandri Dust and Skeleton Horde Contrast, we're going to paint his hair. We're going to start off with a base layer of Xandri Dust all over his hair. And once that is done, we're then going to take Skeleton Horde Contrast and apply it everywhere. We want to make sure it pools, but not too heavily, so we're going to constantly go back and dry it in certain places where it pools too much. Now, we are going to dry brush, but I found a very good way to dry brush very well and accurately and to get the paint on looking good. What we're going to do is we're going to take our brush and we're just going to dunk it in water. And once that's done, we're going to rapidly dry it on a paper towel. And I want to make sure it's basically a little damp. There's a little bit of water that you can tell, but it's not a lot. You can touch it and you can feel, oh, maybe there's water on it. We then take it, apply paint onto it, and then we just squash it onto a paper towel to dry it. Get it mixed in, make sure it's not runny. We do a bunch of backs and forths onto a paper towel to make sure it's not streaking. Add some more paint in, and then this loads the brush very well that it's a very smooth dry brushing. It's not going to look very raggedy or dirty. We will then apply a slightly watered down layer of Skeleton Horde Contrast after we've dry brushed it again. And then once that dries without pulling too heavily in certain places, we will then apply another dry brush, but this time we're going to focus on towards the ends of his locks of hair, where it's thinner and stuff, where we kind of would think light would go through hair and stuff. And once that is done, we're then going to take a fine brush and draw straight lines onto locks of hair that are around his face and around, like, straight lines throughout his hair. And now with Cadian Flesh Tone, Magos Purple, and Kislev Flesh, we're going to paint his skin. We're going to start off with a base layer of Cadian Flesh Tone all over. And then we're going to apply a thin layer of Magos Purple all throughout the spots on his skin. We will then apply straight lines of Cadian Flesh Tone on all the defined areas of his face, as well as the large center sections of flesh on his back. I then apply another layer of Magos Purple onto his face and body, and then I take a brush and I keep dipping and draining it for the spots that are too excessive. I then go and take Kislev Flesh and apply it on all the edges of his hands, or basically the edges of his skin, folds of his muscles, stuff like that. Then try to do some definition with his face by adding little bits of diluted Magos Purple into his eyes and mouths so it'll appear. It's a little messy. Then I take the pure Kislev Flesh and then I apply it on the raised and most pronounced parts of his face, his nose, his eyebrows, his forehead, his neck, his chin. I keep messing up his eyes though, so his facial features are hard to pronounce. And so I try another layer of Kislev Flesh to highlight it further, but it looks too, how do I put it, like clownish? Like the contrast is too strong. Now the main body has done well with the highlights of Kislev Flesh over and over and stuff like that, so the flesh on his body looks good, but his face looks too clownish. So I start over with his face. I layer on Kislev Flesh and then I put another layer of watered down Magos Purple on it, and then I start from there. And then highlight it with Cadian Flesh Tone. And once that is finished, I then do a 1-to-1 mix of Cadian and Kislev Flesh and apply it to his most pronounced features: nose, cheeks, forehead, eyebrows, neck vein, muscles. I then do a second layer of this 1-to-1 mix because the first layer was a good foundation, and then I apply it over and you can see his facial features and stuff. And then I go with pure Kislev Flesh on his most pronounced, his eyebrows, the tip of his forehead, like a dot on his forehead, tip of his nose, the most raised areas of his cheeks, and like the front part of his neck muscles. And then with Guilliman Flesh, I water it down, and I mean I water it down. So I then apply it over his whole face and stuff, and see where it pulls to add a little bit more flesh color to him and a little more definition into him. And now with Wraithbone, Pallid Witch Flesh, and Eshin Grey, we're going to paint his horns. We're going to start off with a base layer of Wraithbone all throughout. And then once that's done, we're then going to take Pallid Witch Flesh and we're going to paint like 75% of the horns going up this color. And then once that's done, we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of pallid and Eshin Gray, and we're going to apply it to around halfway up the horns. And I didn't film it, but then I took pure Eshin Gray and then applied it onto the last quarter of his horns. I then take contrast medium, yes I do have it, and skeleton horde contrast, and I mix it together in sort of a 2 parts contrast to 1 part skeleton horde, and then I apply it onto the horns there to add a little bit more color and depth into them. And this is Sigvald. His face, it's the best I can do. He's a little tricky because has a very flat face. However, at a distance, which is most likely what you're going to be seeing him regularly on tabletop, is that you can clearly make out the features of his face, his nose, eyes, mouth. It's clearly distinct. So, okay, I'll take that. And with Dark Reaper, Celestia Gray, and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to be painting his shield. I'm going to start off with a base layer of, well actually 2 base layers of Dark Reaper Gray onto his shields, the front and most of the back. And then once that's done, we're going to apply Celestia Gray to the, how do I put it, top left of his shield facing the front. Although you have to use a lot of paint in an airbrush in order to make it come out not grainy, so I had to risk a lot to paint almost nothing. And then I took a little bit of pure Pallid Witch Flesh and I painted the same thing, or airbrushed it onto it to add some more like a highlight point where the light hits. And now with Mournfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint the soft leather on the inside of the shield. We'll start with a base layer of Mournfang Brown. Then when that dries, we'll apply Agrax Earthshade. And when that dries, we will highlight the folds of the leather with Mournfang Brown. Quick, simple, done. And now with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we are going to varnish everything we painted. All the capes, all the flesh, and the base. And now with Warplock Bronze, we're going to paint all the metal of his armor, the points on this shield, and his sword handle. However, spoiler, this was a complete waste of time, don't do it. And now with Liquid Gold, with Vallejo Liquid Copper, Liquid Gold, Old Gold, and Liquid Gold, we're going to paint his armor. We're going to start off with a lot of Liquid Copper, and we're going to apply this on all the parts of his armor. Yeah. And we're also going to overbrush onto his the little points on his shield stuff, because they have like these little indents inside, and it makes the Warplock Bronze show through. Honestly, yeah, the Warplock Bronze was only good on a few places, but mostly was a waste of time. And now with Vallejo Liquid Gold, Old Gold, we will apply this onto all the brass, or the copper. Basically what we're going to cover is 90 to 95% of the copper. We're going to overbrush on some places where there is a lot of like filigree detail and stuff, and we will, how do I put it? The places where the red will show through is around all the filigree that of his armor that pokes out, as well as all the depths and recesses. And then with Liquid Gold, we will then apply this on all the major plates, the upper raised areas on, oh, well, yeah, this is the highlight color. on the places where the light will hit, on the most pronounced, the edges, the upper raised areas of his hilt, and such and such. I didn't like how his thighs turned out, the armor on his thighs, so I redid them. I applied liquid copper all over, and then I basically coated 90 to 95% of it with liquid gold, old gold, all the raised areas and such, and I didn't touch the areas around the filigree because I wanted them to be defined. And then I used liquid gold, old gold to highlight the very uppermost raised areas, the filigree, and the big upper raised areas of his flat armor. And then with Rhinox hide, we're just going to paint the leather flap and the straps on the back, just a throwaway color. And then with Xerxes purple, Gene Sealer purple, and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint the gems and the Slaanesh symbol on his shield. We start off with the base layer of Xerxes purple. Now, to make sure the paint doesn't run too much, what we're going to do is we're going to dip the tip of our brush in paint, and then we're going to tap it on a paper towel to get rid of the excess, and then we will overbrush on the top of the symbols and such. We will then move on to the Gene Stealer purple, and we're going to paint a large drop of it on each of the gems, part on the big gem, and about 70 to 80% of the Slaanesh symbol will be overbrushed with this. I then do a 1-to-1 mix of Gene Stealer purple and Pallid Witch Flesh and apply it to like 75% of the previous layer within. And then I take pure Pallid Witch Flesh and I apply like a small, not really a drop, but like a small little part of each of the most colorful parts of the Slaanesh symbol, and paint it around the edges of the big oval gem and like a dot on it on the raised areas of the gems. And with Lead Belcha, we're just going to do this as a throwaway onto the chains that are on his sides. Just get it done and out of the way. And now with Hoeth Blue and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint these little gems that are all scattered throughout his armor. We're going to start off with a base layer of Hoeth Blue on all of them. They're on his knees, the chains, these little gems attached to his chest plate on the top and on the bottom. And so what we're going to do is after that, we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of Hoeth Blue and Pallid Witch Flesh and basically cover 75% to 50% of all the gems in it. And then we will take pure Pallid Witch Flesh and apply a dot onto the small gems at their most raised area, and paint a little curve around on the larger oval gems. Now I have to wait overnight because the liquid golds take their sweet time on drying, and if you touch them you will leave a fingerprint on the metal, and so I had to wait a long time for them to fully dry. And now we're going to do final assembly with it. We're going to use super glue and model glue. Now you'll see I have glued him already to the base. I didn't film it because it was just basically 5 minutes of me holding his feet together, because apparently you have to pinch his legs together so that they will fit into the pre-made holes, and when you put them in, the tension will either blast him out or hold him in. So I filled those holes with super glue, and then I pinched his legs, put him in, and then after a few minutes of holding, they stuck in. So that was not worth filming. Alright, now, for the first cape, I'm going to apply it here. It has chains around the area, so I apply a little bit of modeling glue into the area because I'm going to have to physically push some things around, so I don't want it to accidentally seal too quickly with super glue. So we will gently push this in, moving the little chains around with pressure as we force this in. And then everything else is just added in with super glue. His big cape up top, added with super glue, forgot to film that, I was in a rush. And then his head, he has a little thing that sticks into a hole that's pre-made there. I just clipped it because I knew it was going to get caked on with paint and wouldn't fit in, and so I just added a lot of super glue into the area and just plopped his head on. However, before you apply the head, this is very important. You apply the big cape, then you apply his chaperons on the right and left first, and then his head comes on last. Head comes on last. And then I glued on his cape, his shield. And he is done, except for his sword. So with Dark Reaper, Dawnstone, and Administratum Gray, I'm going to do a quick dip into NMM and non-metallic metal. So we can start off with Dark Reaper Gray all over his sword for the base layer. It's bluish. Then we're going to take Dawnstone, and on the top half of his blade, I'm going to do flicking motions all along the blade, and do a little bit of that towards the center middle of the bottom parts of his blade. And I'm also going to edge the sides of his blade. He's a double-edged sword, so the two edges and the edges in the middle. And then with Administrative Gray, I'm basically going to do the same tap 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 thing onto where the Dawnstone was, and then I'm also going to apply a edging onto his blade and certain areas just for highlighting. It was a quick attempt, I tried. And done, because I ran out of storage space and I couldn't film or take any more pictures. So, the only things that afterwards I did was I used Liquitex Gloss Varnish on each and every one of the gems, including the purple ones, and on his sword as well, the sword blade. And then I just added that little gold filigree that is on the blade itself, the Slaanesh symbol. And yeah, it's done. So this was an interesting project. My dry brushing improved because of it, so I'm happy for that. The base looks amazing. So if I was to rate it, I'm gonna say an 8 out of 10 in the end. There's some parts that look great. There's some parts that, not as good. And so interestingly, this is a little bit of a difficult model to assemble afterwards. His armor, his chest plate looks great. The Warp Block Bronze turned out as a great depth. It applies a lot more depth into the model and it looks interesting. His legs I didn't do too as well. His thighs I improved upon. His sword, it looks good, or the sword hilt. Sword blade, I didn't really have any vision for the NMM and the non-metallic metal. So I tried it. It's a good first try, but it's meh. The shield, fortunately, I basically would have had to sacrifice a lot of paint to fill the airbrush up to the point that it would come out nice and smooth, and so I kind of cheaped out a little bit on that. So the contrast between the Dark Ashen Gray and the Celestial Gray is basically not there. His base looks amazing. His cape flapping looks amazing. The dry brushing did really well. I was very surprised. I'm going to keep using that damp dry brush thing. His face, however, was one of the failures I had. It's I don't know. He actually has a shovel face. I mean, his face is very plain. He has a long face. He has a horse face. His face is plain and horse-like. He has such a long face. The long face jokes would work on him because he literally has it. He doesn't really have many distinct facial features apart from a strong neck and just a horse face. So it's hard to get some good definition there, but the washes on the face will help add a little bit of color to what little definition there is. His hair, it turned out good, but I felt like something was lacking. It wasn't as good as it could be, colorful as it could be. But then again, I was kind of going for that Swedish blonde kind of thing, and so it has the colors, has the dark brownish. It works well, but I feel like it could be better. It's good, but it could be better. And overall, it's I did good. I painted the armor, which is what I really wanted to do for this model, but I don't know, I feel like something is lacking, and I just can't put my finger on it. Well, By the way, this is done. Moving on. He was a stepping stone. I have some more Slaanesh coming this way because I want to prepare for eventually that chariot palanquin. So I'm basically knocking out a bunch of other things to pick up the Slaanesh skills to tackle on that big one. So, alright. Like the video if you liked the video. Dislike it if you disliked it. Leave a comment. Apparently it helps make my stuff appear more visibly according to YouTube algorithm, and I do want to grow. So comment if you have anything to say or just want to leave a comment. You could even just comment. Or share the video if you want to share the video, and subscribe for more. And more is coming. So I'll see you when the next model is done, because I ain't rushing perfection.